In Act Without Words 1, Beckett allegorizes the French colonial situation and the dangerous politics of both action and inaction against violent structures. Read historically, Beckett uses the bodily element of mime and the mechanics of theater to model the dynamics of modern biopolitics. The silence and form of a mime play resonates against the contemporary problem of dissent during the Algerian War and is central to Beckett's political dramaturgy. The mime acts to escape a structure that violently controls him, and he fails. His final act is to sit in stillness, and this also doesn't do anything to halt the violence. The structure continues to act on him. And note, it is unclear who acts against the mime. Theater itself seems to work against him. Beckett disallows the neatness of identification that would allow theater to stand in for only the nation, only the state, imperialism, racism, and so forth. The play is intensely pessimistic in this regard, as Beckett can scarcely offer a solution. There is only failure. As long as the terms of hierarchical power exist, in whatever form, there will still be violence. Beckett's theater thus becomes a model for the political itself, for the audience mirrors the mime, sitting and watching in silence, doing very little, as according to the dictates of Western theater decorum. Beckett's theater models the violence of inaction as much as action and coerces complicity out of the spectatorial act. They are similarly stuck, unable to desert, unable to speak, acting themselves without words.
I've been working on the French modernist novelist, poet, and playwright Raymond Roussel. In some sense, he fits a typical narrative of an avant-garde failure. His works were unappreciated in his own time, but I want to use the opportunity of this panel to think of failure in his work very differently. Rather than recoup his plays as ignored masterpieces, I want to revisit them without celebrating them, and propose that their failure is in fact precisely where they should begin to interest us. His writing consists almost exclusively of exhaustive descriptions of nonsensical objects. They are performing machines, but as they do not resemble or purport to replace humans, they are not automata. Notably, Roussel was thus known as a playwright by his passionate fans, the Surrealists. André Breton sent a famous note to Roussel declaring the work, quote, "the only play it has been my privilege to see." Roussel's plays are boring. As a French scholar of Roussel has complained, Roussel's writing for the theater is somehow his least theatrical writing. What is going on here? Where the popular fiction of automata centers on scenes of substitution and imagines the theater as a set of persons susceptible to replacement, Roussel has described an automatic theater in an Aristotelian vein. It is therefore a kind of utopian imagination of performative repetition, repetition without difference and without end. Roussel's play Locus Solus is not just a failure. It thematizes its own failure. Specifically, the contradiction Roussel locates between automaticity, this total smoothness, and theatricality can be playfully held on to in prose, but cannot be materially resolved. Is the conjunction between automaticity and theatricality as fantastical now as he then imagined? Are we not given the impression of infinite loops of performance, both cinema and theater, by platforms such as Twitch, YouTube, and especially TikTok? In summary, I suspect that in our performance cultures of digital control, cultures dominated by the commercial traffic in performances of racialized and gendered bodies, an integration of theatrical and automaticity has newly become possible. Roussel's failure has perhaps become a dark sort of success.
I'm part of a cohort of scholars who reject the notion of racial passing in favor of the concept of shape-shifting. Winifred Eaton wrote not about Asian American themes, but about a mixed race consciousness. And I suggest that she shape-shifted into a Japanese persona Onoto Watana. Eaton has three failures: her supposed failure to publicly embrace her Chinese heritage and masquerade as a Japanese woman, and to write within the Orientalist genre rather than to comment on Chinese diasporic themes like her sister, Edith Eaton. Eaton's third failure is that of the Broadway play itself, whose production was panned in the press as compared to the box office smash Madame Butterfly. If you aren't familiar with Winifred Eaton, she's an Amerasian writer born in Montreal in 1875. Her father was English, her mother was Chinese. Watana often posed in Japanese kimono, and you can see the shape-shifting process at work here. Because of Eaton's racial ambiguity, we accept whatever she tells us about her ethnic background. The adaptation of A Japanese Nightingale was written by William Young, who's most famously known for the mega hit Ben-Hur. When Young adapted the novel, he changed Yuki's ethnic background to be one that was entirely monoracially Japanese. The play, no surprise then, suffered negative reviews. Alan Dale from the New York American saw little to no representation of Japanese culture other than, quote unquote, a nice satin kimono and 2 streaks of makeup in her eyes. And he's referring to American actress Margaret Illington, who portrayed Yuki in Yellowface. What we don't see is an Amerasian woman with blue eyes and red hair. So this is interesting because we have New York reviewers calling out Illington's Yellowface performance as inauthentic at the turn of the century. The review implies that Illington did not perform the role in the pidgin English characteristic of Eaton novels, which seems to have disrupted reception of Japaneseness for the spectators. Now, by contrast, if we consider the reviews for the 1900 review of Madame Butterfly calls the play, quote unquote, a picturesque little tragedy of the deserted Japanese dancing girl, admirably and effectively performed in every particular. And in an interview in the New York Times, Blanche Bates describes her pre-show makeup routine thus. In the first place, Madame Butterfly takes a great deal of time, for the real eyebrows have to be entirely obliterated and the others marked on. And you can see Blanche on our left. And if I could just show you Margaret Illington again. So she and Bates look rather similar, right? And you can see here on the right what she's talking about. The eyebrows have been entirely erased, new orientalized ones have been drawn on. But the failure of the production seems to be the failure to effectively reproduce Yellowface. And it also reveals a necessity to recognize the importance of accurate representation in theater. A mixed race consciousness is completely different than a monoracial or Asian American consciousness. And I think it's the combination of these that points to the production status as a flop. It's a missed opportunity to harness theater's power as a generative site of ethical representation.
This is a stage manager's report from a performance of the 1980 Broadway revival of Mornings at 7. The note reads, "Show played well." The terse, middling endorsement feels underwhelming, inconsequential. On other days, however, the performance report looks like this. And I think our tendency as scholars of theater and performance is to turn to these messy, interesting performance reports. But I've been arguing in my recent work against this form of archival exceptionalism and seeking a scholarship that better understands the average. Mornings at 7 by Paul Osborne was revived at the Lyceum Theater on April 10th, 1980. I have 579 stage managers' performance reports from this revival. Here is a box plot showing the distribution of performance playing times. Fully half of all performances were plus or minus 90 seconds, a variation around the mean of 1.26%. That, to my mind, is amazingly precise. But we can and should admire precision. These reports document professional work at the highest level, characterized chiefly by remarkable precision. So we can plot the performance timings in a line chart from the first preview until closing night, that's the dotted light line, along with the trend line, that's the heavier dark line. What's going on here? This is that same chart, but with vertical lines indicating some major events in the production's run. So here are box plots. On the left, the original box plot I showed you, and then each succeeding one for each of those production phases from the preceding figure. Performance timings give us one view of a production's general shape, of what the production is. Thus, some changes alter a production's shape as defined here by running time, but others don't. Ultimately, 21 actors performed in this revival on Broadway. Those 21 actors combined to form 38 unique cast configurations during the run. Here's a bar chart of errors reported during the run in a set of controlled categories. And as you can see, by far the most frequent problems related to lines. Audiences, for instance, the top row, caused 68 distinct incidents noted in these reports and were thus the biggest source of trouble. A history of Mornings at Seven's exceptionally unruly or erratic performances would miss its real achievement, namely the precision with which the company maintained an integral production. Of the best performances, the stage manager need only write, "Show played well." Thank you.